let's talk about what are some of the good things. Give me names of leaders. Give me names of movements. People tried to pioneer things. The term missional community became used more. Like as you reflect on that particular decade in the 2000s, like what were some of the helpful things that came out? Ed?
Me first, huh?
Yeah.
Well, people started making family trees, and part of the challenge is that in the middle of, in my view, in the middle of the missional church conversation, the emerging church came along,
Hmm.
and I think that those things were both intertwined, maybe understood in ways that were unhelpful. So some of the missional church conversation, you look at like Leadership Journal did a missional family tree. And in that, it was kind of interesting because it listed, it came out of Gooder. I don't think Allen was listed on there, but Exiles by Mike Frost was, which is, and
He's Forgotten Ways right next to it.
oh, is it Forgotten Ways right there? Okay, good. And so you can kind of get a picture of, and I'm looking at it right now, and they kind of shaped it. And I would say, I would look at this now and say, I don't know that was, I would have framed it differently. And they were gracious towards me and some of my co-authors and towards Alan. Forgotten Ways is right at the top of missional communities. But I think in and around there, some names like who helped mainstream it would be Milford Minitry, would be, of course, Craig Van Gelder, then the Ministry of the Missional Church, not God's Missionary People, which was in the 90s and didn't get as noticed until later. I certainly think that's there. And the question too is where do you put like someone like Neil Cole or,
Right.
Wolfgang Simpson? Where do you put those people who were calling for alternative ecclesial expressions, but weren't necessarily engaging until later a robust theology of the Missio Dei? So, organic church was a new framing and certainly had missional components to it. So I think that's where it gets complicated. So in that very much pure missional lane, I would have put, if I was doing the family tree, I would have put the shaping of things to come more prominently there, at least for me. That was a key part. So here I am finishing a PhD in missiology, and I'm like, oh, that's, yes. And I could see and hear that, and that helped me to frame some of my thinking around it. So those are some of the things I'd put. Forgotten Ways right at the top. I apologize for missing that, Alan, but I was trying to pull up the tree. My point is that I think there's a lot of things that I wouldn't have put on that tree that they did, and things that I would put more in that they didn't. And I think, for example, the shaping of things to come, to me, is a key framing. The missional church, I think, introduced the language
Yeah.
in the title even. But yeah, shaping things to come became really challenging to me.
Yeah. Alan, reflecting on the early 2000s, what are some
Yeah.
of the key moments there for you?
Yeah, I think just a bit of history behind Shaping. Shaping came out pretty much out of our frustration in trying to find tools that really enabled us to be able to do the contextualized church planting that we needed to do. And it was around church planting and other forms of missional endeavor. But all we had was Bob Logan, actually, at the time. I mean, there was very little, and Bob Logan stuff, and he would confess this now, as you've already said, it was very one-dimensional, and it really had presumed that ecclesiology was correct. It never really asked any questions about the prevailing ecclesiology. In fact, it front-loaded it, and I think that's the problem, is that ecclesiology is important, but it's got to be, I think, a subset of missiology. We do mission and the church emerges from our missionary endeavors, not the other way around. So we don't front-load a model of church. And so we just didn't have anything to build. So we wanted, at the time, Mike and myself, we started Forge Mission Training Network out of the frustration that we just simply had no material. And we felt we needed to train incarnational church planters for Australia. And so we developed our own curriculum, and that was really what it was. We did some research for it. We did a couple of trips around the world and met people and interviewed them and all. There were some fascinating people trying to collect their stories and compare notes. And you realize that actually God was doing something quite significant. It wasn't just us, but we were naming, partly because of the difficulty of our context, that demanded a missionary response. So that's a bit of shaping. So and really, it was a book that probably dropped at the right time. Interestingly, Ed, you appreciate this. We actually delivered it in 2001. And the Hendrickson was the publisher at the time. They were nervous about that. So it's too radical. So they actually were going to dump it, and they were going to sit on it and not even give us the rights back. So we had to talk them off the ledge on that.
Wow.
And so it came out at least a year later, probably longer than what it was intended. And we thought it was done. No one will read it. The ideas are finished. And actually, God's economy probably landed at the right time.
Yeah, and I would say it was disruptive is a language that I might use.
Yeah.
And because I interacted with it positively and negatively. The things I did, Alan and I would talk later about, I probably have maybe what we might call higher and lower, doesn't mean good or bad, but I have a higher ecclesiology on some things than that I saw in Shaping and other things. And so I actually interacted some with that.
Yes.
But I think the key thing is it hit at the right time. And
Yes,
part of the right time I think it hit at was that people were dissatisfied with the church growth movement, with the and again, I don't want to caricature because I think that's what happened. I think that's unfair to people. But what I think many in the church growth movement would now say was an overemphasis on leadership, though now I think some of the missional church movement needs to not be afraid of leadership ideas, but an overemphasis on leadership, often the CEOization of pastoral leadership.
There's a certain type of leadership, I think, more the CEO, like you're saying.
Right, for sure. So this comes and it's disruptive in a good way that causes people to shape and have conversations. And also, too, because Alan has, particularly as the emerging church, as parts of the emerging church, eventually veer off out of what we would consider orthodox as evangelical Christians. And as that happens, still to see the missional church conversation, as there's still a place where you can engage emerging cultures, you can live on mission. You don't have to be like the inherited models that you may dislike. And so I think that became a key thing. So having somebody in that space where both, Mike and Alan are very countercultural in both cases, very, well, not Americans, talking about mission, doing so with a commitment to see the Bible understood and engaged, people coming to faith in Christ and being transformed by the power of the gospel. I think people said, okay, these guys are not where I am on everything, but they're fellow travelers. And I love the future travelers would be something Alan would later articulate. And then, but eventually you got to remember too, mainstream, Keller is the mainstream. Yeah. So Keller, and even what I thought was fascinating when Alan Hirsch started to do work with Tim Keller, I thought it's like, I don't know, it was like a crossover episode.
Tim's a gorgeous man. He's just a privilege to work with, but yes, but yes, definitely more of the kind of the more conservative side of the